According to data from Statista.com, the average price of a new home sold in 2020 in the USA was $391,000. According to Climate Change Realty, the price of finding your real estate agent and creating thousands of dollars in donations to support climate action is and always will be $0. Welcome to the podcast. Ariel, really nice to meet you. Thank you so much for taking some time to come on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to meet you as well.
Yeah, delighted to have you. And, we always like to get this show started with a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to be doing what you're doing. But today we're going to do something different, and we're going to start with fact or fiction. Did you or did you not create Got Milk?
So I'm going to clarify that question just a smidgen. So Got Milk was a big campaign, I believe in the 90s and into the 2000s. So there were a whole lot of Got Milk commercials created by Goodby Silverstein and Partners, which is an ad agency in San Francisco. I worked at Goodby Silverstein and Partners, and while I was there, I was a junior copywriter for them. While I was there, I created a Got Milk commercial for the women's U.S. soccer team. I'm drawing a blank. Whatever the big event was, the Women's World Cup. That's the term I was going for.
It's a big one.
Yeah. But so the way the Got Milk commercials worked, this is probably way more information than you guys actually cared about.
No,
the way the Got Milk commercials work is they were created by the California Milk Board in partnership with Goodby Silverstein and Partners. And then if they did well in California, other state milk boards might buy them up, and so they'd start to become national commercials. Since mine was geared specifically towards the Women's World Cup, unless you happened to be in San Francisco for the 2 weeks that it was playing, you didn't see it. But I have created one.
Well, I'm sure some people did. Shout out to the Women's World Cup soccer team of 1992 or whatever we were talking about. Cool.
I thought 2002. I don't remember, something like that.
2002. A decade off. What's the difference? But yeah, fun way to get the show started. And then we always, how did you get to be doing what you're doing now?
So I do have a little bit of a random background. So I went to school. I got a degree in English. And just as I was finishing the degree in English, I read Hyperspace by Michio Kaku and was in awe and decided that if I ever went back to school, I was going to study physics. And so I went out into the world with my degree in English, and I worked at the ad agency. I actually worked at astrology.com for a year or so. I did a lot of sort of freelance writing for a little while. And then I did decide I wanted to go back to school. And so I went back and I got a degree in physics. I got a master's degree in geophysics. I studied earthquakes for a couple of years. And then ended up sort of combining those two backgrounds. So I started doing more science communication, and I got involved. First, I got involved with a couple national labs, actually. And then I got involved with the Future of Life Institute. And while I was there, I did a lot of work on existential risks. And so that's the idea that we could, existential risk in general is, risk to the destruction of humanity. And the Future of Life Institute tended to focus more on human-caused existential risks. So it tended to be, due to artificial general intelligence or climate change or biotechnology or nuclear weapons.
What's your favorite book / philosophical work?
On these issues?
No, not just. You studied English, so I'm assuming you read many things, and then you studied physics, so then I'm assuming you read lots of papers, and then you got a master's in geophysics. So I'm just wondering what you've read a lot of work. I'm wondering what stands out when I ask you what your favorite is.
Oh, I feel like a cliche, but I am sort of a fan of Jane Austen. I don't know. I don't know that I have a favorite book. I mean, that is sort of one where when you read enough, it's sort of like, what's your favorite movie? It can be hard. I'll think about this and we can come back to it.
No worries. Yeah, I haven't read many books, so I do have a very easy favorite,
Oh,
and it's
what's your
Principles
favorite?
by Ray Dalio. I don't know if you've heard of
Not
that
familiar.
book.
Mm-mm.
It's just giving you like maxims of how to lead a successful life from the founder of the most successful hedge fund of all time. And he's a very logical thinker. He's like, if you want to achieve this, then you should do that. And then the whole book is about, it's like his autobiography, and then it's his principles on how to succeed just generally in life. And then he goes into his work principles of how he's built his company to be this idea meritocracy where the best ideas win. It's not an autocracy where one person says what to do. It's an idea meritocracy where the best ideas determine how they're going to move forward.
How do you determine what the best ideas are?
By using believability weighted decision making to prioritize ideas. So, for example, if you and I were to have a conversation about how to sell your house, I'm more believable because I've sold more houses than you. So like if it's a voting system, maybe this is personal for a house, but like if you were another realtor and you sold 10 houses and I sold one, you would have 5 votes and I would have one in a discussion of 20 people talking about what's the best way to sell the house. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how from why English initially, and then what was it that sparked your interest in like science and physics?
So yeah, I didn't get into this initially, but the English was actually a fluke. I was studying science to begin with.
Okay.
I went to the University of Wisconsin for 2 years, and I was studying. I think I was studying zoology. I don't remember exactly, um, but I liked reading. I loved reading, and so every semester I made sure I took an English course because I was fairly confident that if I wasn't being forced to read for class, I wouldn't be reading at all. Um, and 2 years in, sort of, this is a much longer story we won't get into, but I ended up having to transfer schools and I went to the University of Oregon. Um, and they didn't have a zoology program there at the time. And so I was sort of going back to biology and they had different course requirements. And I was in my junior year and I was like halfway through my junior year and I sat down with the guidance counselor and she was looking at my the transcript and what I had done so far, and she was explaining to me that in order to get a degree in biology I still had 2.5 years plus summer school, if I was going to complete the degree. And then she kind of looked at her computer funny and she was like, oh, you could get a degree in English and graduate on time without any extra summer courses. And that's how I have an English degree.
Nice. So you've always been interested in science.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What led you to eventually start to focus on existential risk mitigation?
So that was primarily the job at FLI. Certainly, studying earthquakes, I got a little bit into just a little bit better understanding of how society thinks about risk. It's not something that I actually studied, but it's you sort of it's there in the periphery when you're studying earthquakes. So I was certainly interested in it, and then yeah, the job at FLI that's what they do, and that's sort of how I got into it.
So what is Future of Life Institute, and what was your experience like working there?
Yeah, so the Future of Life Institute is an organization that they're sort of a do tank more than anything else, that and research grant making institution that focuses on existential risks, primarily associated with artificial intelligence, but also just existential risks in general. And so while I was there, the two biggest areas that we looked at were artificial intelligence um, and nuclear weapons. And so they actually got, I want to say they got about $10 million in funding from Elon Musk in 2015 for AI safety research. Um, and then they got support from other groups as well, but that one was specifically for AI safety research. And then they've gotten another big grant donation since I left. And I was there for about 4 years, and it was a really exciting place to work. I got to get involved in a lot of really interesting projects, meet a lot of just really amazing people. The FLI team is a really fun group to work with.
What was your role?
it was sort of ever evolving.
That's fun.
It was technically like, I think I got brought on to be like their news editor or something like that. And then it sort of quickly expanded into director of communications and then director of communications and outreach. And I was really involved in just about almost everything they were doing, not everything, but nearly everything. It was a very, very small team, so it was very easy to wear many, many hats.
Cool. All right, let's talk about what's going on now. What is Tango Future, and what made you want to start this organization?
Yeah, so Tango Future is an organization that I launched with Susie Snyder, and Susie is one of the people that I actually met through FLI. She was working on a campaign called "Don't Bank on the Bomb," and she was also the president of the board of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. They actually, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is actually a treaty passed now at the United Nations that has made nuclear weapons illegal. Her organization was very instrumental in getting that passed, and they actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. So a little bit of information about her.
Awesome.
But so
Shout out.
she, yeah. So she and I were both working. I was helping her with some of their efforts, and then she and I were both sort of working in this UN space, and we experienced firsthand, sort of what you hear a lot about, sort of this idea that policymakers do not always understand how emerging technology works. They don't understand how policies that they're creating around emerging technology might impact people. They don't usually understand how the technology itself might impact people around the world. And then on the opposite side, people who are developing the emerging technologies usually don't understand how policy works. They also often don't understand how their technologies may impact different communities around the world. And we wanted to start looking at how to address the communication and knowledge gaps between those groups of people. But when we started looking at that more, we realized that this is a problem that exists across all sorts of different sectors. It's not just between policymakers and emerging technology or people developing emerging technology. We see it between policymakers and scientists. We see it just among different fields in science. We see it between people in different business sectors, people in arts and communication who would usually be very good at helping you communicate these ideas aren't usually part of the conversations. So what we wanted to do was start looking at how can we help address these communication and knowledge gaps across all of these different sectors more effectively. And then in addition to that, one of the problems that we see a lot is, even now, while people are making more of an effort to address diversity issues, it's still a problem. And especially when you're looking at these big problems that are going to affect people globally, we're not getting enough people from around the world at the table, and we're not hearing enough from people who have lived experiences. So, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that we see, so an example, with the nuclear treaty that got passed, one of the things that happened is, for 7 decades, there were a lot of treaties that were passed, but there were always efforts to get nuclear weapons banned at the United Nations, and they never went anywhere. And where the people who wanted to just completely ban nuclear weapons finally started to have success was when they began bringing in people who had lived experiences. They brought in the people who had survived the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They brought in the people who had lived too close to nuclear weapons testing sites and had seen the negative repercussions of that. And when we started hearing from these people who had actually been affected by these humanitarian impacts, that was when a lot of countries started to reassess their stance on nuclear weapons. And so the value of lived experience, I think, is often underrated in a lot of discussions, and we want to try to address that. So Tango, go ahead.
Well, the idea being humanize a problem so people can actually understand what kind of repercussions come from it.
Yep. Yeah, and so what we're trying to do with Tango, which stands for Technology, Arts, and a New Global Objective for the Future, Tango Future. What we're trying to do is a couplefold. So one is just to create this database of people, especially women and people of color from around the world, who either are experts in their fields or who have those relevant lived experiences. So we want a single place where people can go to sort of find these people who have lots of different expertise, lots of different experiences. And then we want to facilitate and support meetings between these diverse people, from the different backgrounds and from the different locations. And start getting them also having meetings with policymakers, or have them meet with people who are developing technologies, and just try to start creating more of these opportunities for people to interact with others who just are outside of their normal bubbles.
And so this is run as a nonprofit organization?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
And we're still very young. We're very much getting started right now. We've got some cool people who are involved, but we're very young right now. We're just getting started.
Well, awesome time to be talking to you. That's cool. So
thank you.
I'm guessing, and I want to ask, the most effective way to bridge the gap between all these different people, whether they're experts in one thing or they're policymakers or their industry or they're the general public, is to have them all engage in conversation all around the specific issue. Is that kind of the idea? Or
yeah, so what we're going to experiment with is the idea. So to take a quick step back, I think there's a lot of information that exists about different fields. So if you want to learn about artificial intelligence, tons of people have written about it. If you want to learn about bias in artificial intelligence, tons of people have written about it. Lots of information exists online. You can find TED Talks and podcasts and anything else about these issues. But if you're not in the space and you have questions, there aren't really people it's not that easy to just find someone who does this for a living. And so what we want to try to do, and then on the opposite side as well, if you're in that space of AI bias, you actually may or may not have had that much interaction with people who have been impacted, especially if some of the ways in which people are impacted by the technology is triggered by cultural differences. And so if they're from a completely different culture, you may not have interacted with them. And so what we want to try to do is experiment with the idea that giving people a chance to interact with and ask questions of and answer questions, having these conversations, actual conversations with people from other fields, from other parts of the world, can hopefully help address a lot of these gaps so that we can start talking. I think the interaction is what's often missing.
So if I'm like a weapons manufacturer, I think I have like huge, big, fat pockets from like the military industrial complex. Why is someone like that going to come join a round table with a bunch of people from around the world to talk about potentially decreasing the amount of purchases of their product?
So, I mean, to a certain extent, you may not be the target audience, to be honest. I hope that that's not the case. I think that there are a lot of people, say in the weapons industry, who are still interested in having those conversations, in hearing from people who might be impacted. I mean, I think I do, the people that I've met in the weapons industry still want to make sure that their systems aren't, inadvertently killing civilians or inadvertently killing the wrong people. That is something that they want to try to prevent. So I think I'm hoping that we will still be able to get people like that into the conversation. But, if we're getting people from other parts of the world to talk about how AI has impacted them, and their conversations are happening with policymakers. That's still really helpful. I think trying to reach out to the policymakers, I think we'll probably start with the lower hanging fruit, the people who are actually interested in hearing from these other groups, and then hopefully prove that this is a valid approach.
Yeah, I think their weapons are probably purposely killing civilians, but that's a discussion for another podcast.
Yeah.
Is there a specific issue that you're working on at the current moment? Is there some particular topic that you guys are focused on right now?
For Tango, no, not really. So what we're trying to do, we're not trying to say that X, Y, or Z issue needs to be addressed. We're saying we need to hear from other people to understand how X, Y, or Z issue is impacting them.
And what are you doing at in your consulting practice? Is that right? Mag 10?
Yeah. I work with different nonprofits, typically in this same space. So FLI, I was working as a consultant when I was at the Future of Life Institute. I worked with an organization called AllFed, which helps. They're doing research and they're doing more outreach to try to ensure that people have access to enough food and nutrients if we do end up facing an existential risk. So, if there is nuclear war and we end up in a situation with nuclear winter, how do we make sure that the people who have survived still have enough food? Or, same with an asteroid impact or a super volcano or something like that.
Right.
Sorry, just a sec.
No worries.
Use my voice.
No, yeah, no, you're all good. Yeah, let's kind of talk about some of these issues that you're pretty well versed in, because I think they're all really interesting. If you toss aside the whole existential fear of death thing, so let's talk about what is AI and like the essential risks and opportunities presented by this type of technology.
Yeah, so artificial intelligence. It's funny you asked what it is, because I've been in so many conversations lately where no one has good definitions, but it's essentially types of computer machine learning that enable the system to figure out how to approach a problem without a human making that decision for the system. So a very, very basic example are, just like a Google search. Their algorithms figure out which website you most likely want to see based on the words you typed into your search, and no one programs the algorithm to say, if someone puts X, Y, or Z into the search, then these are the websites you present. The algorithm has to figure it out on its own.
So that does. Yeah, I just wanted to I obviously know what it is. I just wanted to get a brief explanation. And then what are the existential risks to something like this, or the essential risks?
Yeah, so the existential risks that people worry about with artificial intelligence is what happens if it achieves human level or greater intelligence. So right now, most artificial intelligence is what's called narrow. So it can do a specific task, but it doesn't have the same general intelligence that a human does. So the example that I use is, you can program, or you can teach an AI system to learn to play chess. You can teach an AI system to navigate through a city. You can teach an AI system to, do a Google search. But none of those systems yet, at least, know how to figure out how to do some other task. What each of those are, they're three different systems. Whereas I, as a person, can read a map and figure out how to navigate through a city. Or, I, as a person, can learn another language, things like that. And I know how to do all of those things. So that's considered general intelligence. And so the concerns are what happens if we start developing AI systems that have that general level intelligence, that are able to start figuring out how to do all these different things, and they start doing things that we don't want them to do. So either, I think one of the biggest concerns is just that we don't train them well enough, and so they start doing things, figuring out how to do things that we really just never wanted them to do. How do we anticipate that? How do we get the systems to stop? It's very easy to say something like, oh, we just need to, put a stop button on it so we can turn it off or unplug the system. But an analogy I like there is that if you get an AI system that's advanced enough, turning it off, in air quotes, can be kind of like trying to turn off the internet. It's not something you can do. If the system is smart enough, it's probably trying to figure out ways to prevent you from turning it off. And then, of course, there's also concerns. We're sort of assuming that for the most part, if artificial general intelligence does go wrong, it's because it's unintentional. But there are always concerns that someone will intentionally design an AGI that does bad things.
Well, there's also a moral question where if something does have general intelligence, are you turning off a light or are you killing something?
So yeah, there's a lot of questions there as well about, does intelligence mean consciousness? And that I don't have an answer for that one.
Okay. But as far as we're currently using this type of tech for weapons right now to wage war against other nations.
No.
No.
So what you're touching on is I do a lot of work with autonomous weapon systems as well, and so the idea of autonomous weapon systems, these are weapon systems that can that have some sort of function that doesn't require. They have some sort of functionality or capability that doesn't require human intervention of some sort. And we already see this with some weapon systems anyway. Sort of a lot of navigation on missiles at this point might be automated. There's a bunch of other things that do currently exist. There are entire systems that are fairly automated, where there's a much bigger debate is it a human or a machine that's making the decision to take a human life? And right now, I haven't actually been keeping up with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine in terms of autonomous weapons, but there have been some reports previously of possible use of autonomous weapon systems in Syria. But for the most part, they aren't at the level right now where the weapon itself is deciding to take a human life. The technology sort of exists. It hasn't really been deployed in a weapon system to a very large extent. And most people are pretty hesitant to try to develop the Terminator.
Right. So when it comes to your work and your kind of framework of looking at how to make an impact through existential threat mitigation, where is AI, autonomous weapons, nuclear weapons, and the topic of climate change? How are those things all like connected?
Yeah, so the idea is any of these could become an existential risk to humanity. So,
I mean, climate change, kind of.
Yes.
Nuclear war. I mean, kind of like, yes, we're there.
Yeah. If nuclear war breaks out, most people predict that there will be some people who survive, but I'm not particularly eager to live in a world that has just survived a nuclear war, not a full-scale nuclear war. I think that would be pretty devastating. And yeah, if we do trigger nuclear winter, that would be mass starvation for most of the world. So yes, that's sort of how nuclear weapons could trigger that. I can elaborate more. I was sort of just
sure. I'm wondering how you mitigate the threat of this kind of stuff. I've obviously spent a lot of time talking about how to mitigate the issues with climate change, but what are your thoughts on how to prevent these things from becoming huge, large scale issues that we're living with every day?
I mean, I would like to see a world without nuclear weapons. I don't think I am personally not convinced that any level of deterrence is worth the risk that comes with them. Realistically, I don't know how countries can diplomatically reduce to zero, at least given current politics, which is a shame because I think even just 10 years ago that might have been more doable. But right now, I don't think that I don't know how realistic it is. But I think if you want to mitigate risks of nuclear war, you've got to get rid of nuclear weapons. That said, there are a few things with nuclear weapons that can be done even while we still maintain arsenals. Are you familiar with sort of the hair trigger alert?
Hair trigger alert? No, I'm not.
So what we have set up right now are there's sort of the three-pronged nuclear system. We've got silos that have nuclear weapons in the ground. We have submarines with nuclear weapons, and we have bombers with nuclear weapons. Russia has the same thing. So this is sort of an old Cold War era setup. And the way it works is if either we hear that Russia has launched a nuclear attack against us, or if we were to launch a nuclear attack against Russia, I'm pretty sure both countries have this in place. We assume that any of the nuclear weapons that are in the silos would be destroyed, and we want a chance to retaliate with them before they get destroyed. And so if we learn of an attack coming towards us, we can launch immediately the weapons that are in the silos. And that's supposed to be the idea is that that's some sort of active deterrence. There's better explanations of how this works online. But so the idea is that's supposed to be an active deterrence. But you basically have about 30 minutes between when the other country launches their nuclear weapons at us and when we would and when they would land on
us, America,
on our land. So
them, Russia,
basically,
China.
Yeah. Russia. So most of our nuclear policies are Cold War based. So it's going to be primarily Russia is the basis for most of our nuclear policies today.
Okay.
Anyway, this is sort of a lot of information, but the point is,
what's important, it's kind of relevant, like having a button to like kill everyone. It's like we kind of just like walk around every day like it's no big deal. And I'll talk to you about like asteroids later on. I think that's another thing that people don't think about. But it's kind of weird that like this is just the way it is.
Well, so it gets weirder. I'll keep going with this. So let's pretend Russia were to decide to launch an attack against the US. It would take 30 minutes from when the weapons were launched from Russia to land on American soil. And so that would give us, that means we've got 30 minutes to decide whether or not we want to respond by launching the weapons that we have in the silos. And so that basically gives and the president is the one who makes this decision. So that gives the president less than 30 minutes really to decide whether or not to retaliate. And one of the things that has happened is there have been a lot of close calls where the information we were getting was, say a false alarm, or just incorrect. And so the president only has, it's going to take a couple minutes after, again, just pretending that Russia had launched. It would take a couple minutes after the weapons launched before the president would even learn. And then you still have like all the communication. I think the Union of Concerned Scientists estimated that the president would end up with about 12 minutes to decide whether or not to retaliate. And so this puts us at a huge risk. So if they are getting the wrong information, they've got 12 minutes to sort of figure that out. And it's a lot of, it's even one nuclear weapon is one too many. So having quite a few silos around the US where we retaliate. And the reason that this is especially silly is even if we are hit, we still have nuclear submarines and we still have nuclear bombers that aren't going to be impacted and that could still retaliate. So there's no reason for us to have that particular system in place. And so it's stuff like that where we could just remove that hair trigger alert. We could say, or we can also just generally say we have a no first use policy. We won't use a nuclear weapon unless we are attacked with a nuclear weapon.
Do we not have that now?
No, no, we reserve the right to. I think the idea is if another country uses a nuclear weapon against another country, the US wants the option to retaliate.
Yeah, I mean, I also have a policy that I won't drive on the left side of the road when I'm going to the gym, but I mean, mistakes are made. Policy is just something people say. Yeah, let's not do this. I mean, I'm trying to think about each side of it, that like in a way maybe that the nuclear weapons have caused peace, but like this, even having like a 0.1% of a chance of this happening is probably way more than zero, which would probably be ideal. I mean, you said you don't have a realistic idea for how to achieve denuclearization, but what have you kind of learned throughout your career with trying to come to conclusions about this? And I know people have been working on this for probably close to 100 years now.
Yeah, nuclear weapons have been around since World War II. So, yeah. I mean, so there's steps that we can take that at least minimize the risk of us using them accidentally. And so removing hair trigger alert, there's no benefit to that.
Is that an autonomous weapon system, the hair trigger alert?
No. That's the weapons are the weapons that are in the silos are always ready to be launched.
Okay.
And that's the process that I was talking about, where the president only has a half hour to decide, because they have to decide before the attack hits U.S. soil. Whereas if you say you're going to rely on the submarines and or the bombers, you can wait until we actually get attacked. And then for a fact, that it wasn't misinformation, a false alarm. There have been a lot of false alarms over the years that nearly triggered nuclear war.
Do you think that maybe AI could propose a solution to this issue by connecting people together with better technology? Because remember, we talked at the beginning about how when you bring someone into the room who's a survivor and you humanize the situation, you feel empathy and you're less likely to push a button and like play battleships, where you just like, could advancements in technology like this potentially bring us closer together and prevent something like that?
I'm personally not hugely optimistic, to be honest. I think if technology was going to enable peace, we would have more peace as technology advanced, and I'm not seeing that.
Hold on. Do we not have more peace than we've ever had in the past, looking at human history on a geological state? Meaning, since humans have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, is this not the most amount of people who are least at war than it's ever been?
Well, I don't think we know that, do we?
I don't know. I'm just
recorded human history only goes back a few thousand years.
That's fair. That's a fair point. But I mean, we're not raiding our neighboring tribes, slaughtering all the men and taking the women and children and integrating.
I think that depends on how you're defining we right now, right?
Well, as a percentage of the total population, like there's less of that going on now than ever before, I would suspect.
I don't have the numbers. I haven't looked into this personally. I have heard a lot of criticisms of cherry-picked data for people who have made those arguments, okay. But I personally haven't looked into the that data. And I don't think, I mean, I'm not convinced of the argument that we're more peaceful. I think how battles are fought might have changed, and maybe people aren't. I don't know enough about that. Like I said, the people that I trust have been skeptical of arguments made saying that we're more peaceful now. But even if that is the case, advancing technology has also increased the odds that it doesn't take much for a huge catastrophe to happen.
What are your thoughts on using some of this stuff outside of war for like other opportunities?
I mean, certainly, we're seeing AI is potentially useful in medical imaging. It seems to have its issues there too, but it's still young. So I don't know. I think I mean, you and I are talking right now thanks to technology. One of the things that makes Tango work is how easily we can communicate with people around the world. So I absolutely think that there are benefits, and we should be taking advantage of those benefits. I'm not convinced that we're more peaceful.
I mean, I know that there is less impoverished people now than over the course of human history, and there are more and more people being lifted out of absolute poverty every day than ever before. And people can argue about that, but the data seems pretty clear to me. Any thoughts about using artificial intelligence specifically for environmental issues, like solving those sorts of problems and increasing stewardship around the planet using tech?
There was, there's been a few things that I've seen that I think are really interesting. There was, I should have pulled up information about this before we started. There was a really interesting report that came out, I think in 2019, by a bunch of AI researchers who were looking specifically at that. How can we use AI to address different issues? And so they were looking at, how can we use AI to improve building efficiency? How can we use AI to improve transportation efficiency? And I think there's just a lot of areas where AI could be really useful for that. It's been a while since I've looked into this, but there was some research being done where AI was able to help better track endangered species, I think it was. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of ways that AI can be used to help improve things from that perspective.
What do you think is the connection between war and like climate change or the deterioration of the natural world?
I mean, a lot of war is fought over resources, right? So if we're losing resources, it would give us reason to expect war. There have been a lot of arguments and evidence pointing to the war in Syria as having been triggered by, I think it was droughts associated with climate change. I think it just comes back to if we don't have as many resources as we're used to, that is often what triggers war.
Right. I think most people, when they listen to this and hear about the stuff we're talking about, are like generally on the same page. And I really don't know, but like people don't want us to kill everything on the planet, because that seems kind of lame if you ask me. So I'm wondering if like your thoughts on how the general public or the masses can gain more influence over the way we make big decisions like this in society, because you're talking about one person, Putin and Biden, having dominion over the whole planet. Like that seems ridiculous. So like how can like the masses gain more power than I don't know. I think of like giant oil tycoons or like the military industrial complex continuing to profit off making more and more weapons. How do you think people can get more of a say in these issues?
Yeah. So I think people underestimate the power of their own financial decisions in a couple ways. I mean, there's, the idea that we should be consuming less anyway, that a lot of our consumption is what drives a lot of the issues around climate change. But also where you're investing your money. Are you investing in oil companies? Are you investing in banks that support oil companies? That was one of the most impactful things that I've learned about that a person can do is if your bank is funding oil companies, you can tell them to stop. And if they don't stop, you go to a bank that isn't. And there's a lot of credit unions and stuff like that aren't funding oil industry. And that's when banks don't like to lose lots of customers. So that is actually one of the most impactful things you can do, because right now oil companies are continuing to build and grow because they're getting loans from banks.
That's a great point. Mm-hmm. Who do you bank with?
I bank with Elevations Credit Union in Colorado.
I thought so. As do I. Yeah.
I previously lived in Idaho, and I've got a credit union in Idaho that I bank with as well.
I think it's a big deal. I think where you spend your money and where you store your money is a really big deal. I think it's just as big a deal as who you vote for, if not even more so, because you get to vote every day with your dollars. I think that's pretty massive. And then you can vote with your dollars as you sleep by picking the right financial institution. So I think that was a great point. I appreciate you saying that. So we've been talking about existential threats to destroying life on Earth for humans at the very least. Maybe the roaches would do pretty well. But do you ever think about like talking about events that could end life on Earth? Do you ever think about like asteroid deflection technology? Any way we can get more interest into this topic? Because this is something that's kind of pretty concerning to me. It's caused like most of the last 5 mass extinction events, I think. Maybe not. But yeah.
It was certainly what triggered the dinosaur extinction. I don't know. That's actually a good question. I don't know enough about the other extinction events. I don't remember if they were asteroids or not. So the one piece of information that I've heard that made me feel a lot better about asteroids is that groups like NASA, and I feel like there's other groups too, and I'm drawing a blank, have actually done a really good job of mapping everything that could potentially hit Earth, at least over our lifetime, and I think possibly a lot further. And nothing seems to be posing a risk right now. Now, there is always a chance that we're missing something or that something comes out of nowhere. But people that I trust have said that we seem to actually be doing a pretty good job of tracking asteroids. So that helped me sleep a little bit better regarding asteroids. In terms of deflecting them, until the movie Don't Look Up came out, I was fairly confident that if an asteroid was coming towards us, we would all try to work together to make it go away. And I do actually think that's still the case. I think an asteroid is, unlike climate change, is a very concrete, easy to see enemy.
I think we are. I think that movie. I saw the film as well. I don't think it's. I think it's a bit too pessimistic. Based on my biased experience of talking to 4 people who are working on trying to save the world every single week, I have the tendency to believe that we are going to get it done, and we're all working together, and there's people really passionate about it. And on top of that, I believe that one person can make a difference. So when I talk to a bunch of people every single week who I see are dedicating their lives to solving these issues, I'm like, okay, we're definitely going to get it done. I don't know when, but I mean, the momentum can't stop. So, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. Obviously, that's why I wanted to have you on the show. I'd like some more answers, I guess. I mean, if we've been trying to there's probably been people have been trying to denuclearize at the very least since like the people with the hippie signs, with the peace signs in the 1960s. And it seems like we have more nukes than ever before. So it might not have worked. And you know what? We have more carbon emissions.
No, we actually, I will say we do not have more nuclear weapons.
In the States?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
We peaked in the late 80s, early 90s at I don't remember what it was for each country, but around the world there were about 70,000 nuclear weapons, 75,000 nuclear weapons, and now we're down to just 14 or 15,000, which is still plenty to
Huge.
destroy everyone on Earth. Like, you'll kill everyone on Earth if those get launched. But yeah, we're actually, there's a lot less. It's just that it's all of it is sort of ridiculous because yeah, you can kill everyone on Earth with that many nuclear weapons if you want to.
Yeah. Well, carbon, you're next. And it's just never too late to keep working on something if it's worth. I mean, at the very limit, just yeah, I don't know, living, but like I just think of like I just think I'd like love just like comes to mind. Like it makes life worth living. Like why have the potential to put a stop to all love on earth? It just seems silly. But I think one might make the argument that the nuclear weapons is what's allowing them to continue living and loving. So it's a complex topic, but it's been cool having you on. Do you want to share a bit about the podcasts that you've worked on before we kind of sign off? The FLI podcast and Not So Cool.
Yeah. So to clarify, I last did interviews for them in 2019. But the FLI podcast is great. If you want to learn more about them,
It's Future
Lucas
Life
was
Institute.
a host. Yeah, Lucas was a host for a while, and I think they're getting someone else now. I don't know enough about what's going on with that, but that's a really great podcast. Obviously, I think the episodes I did were great, but if you want to hear others, they've been happening regularly. I think we started them in 2016.
Cool.
And then the Not Cool podcast was a series that I did where I interviewed climate experts from around the world on a variety of topics. I think I ended up talking to over 30 climate scientists. And we talked about everything from how to communicate about climate change issues to the AI stuff about how AI can help us address climate change issues, the impact of forests, the impact of methane and other gases besides carbon, greenhouse gases. Finance, that came up in a couple of the episodes, sort of the city impact and local impact and how to become more resilient to climate change. There were just a ton of great episodes. I highly recommend that. And I realize I'm biased, but I thought I had so much fun.
Well, being biased is fun. What were some of your biggest takeaways from working on the Not Cool podcast? Not So Cool.
Not Cool. It's the Not Cool podcast.
Okay.
The banking one was actually one of those that came up in one of the episodes that I did. So definitely the changing your bank. I think understanding the forest one was actually a really interesting one for me. We did do one on climate change and conflict that had, I'm trying to remember what some of the outcomes or what some of the things we discussed were. I'm sort of drawing a blank on that one, but the interview was very interesting. There were little facts that like I might have known, but just hadn't really dawned on me. So things like, as weather gets hotter, it means that roads get damaged more easily. And concrete and asphalt is one of the most carbon intensive things you can that we're using. And so to have to be repeatedly fixing roads with something that is making the situation worse, like there's a lot of sort of cyclical things that just keep exacerbating that come up in a bunch of these different episodes.
Yeah, well, the thing is about the roads is that they're built to be within a certain like temperature range, and then that is like widening now, which will like mess up the roads. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Right. So where can people find those podcasts or that podcast?
If you just do a Google search for either the Fli podcast or the Not Cool podcast, I think they should come up pretty quickly in a Google search.
Right on.
Or if you go to the futureoflife.org, I believe they have in one of their menu items you can find their podcasts.
Cool. Well, Ariel, thank you for coming on so I could talk about something that's not explicitly related to the environment. It's kind of nuclear weapons are kind of a very human thing. So it's interesting to get your perspective on that. Any final pieces of advice for young folks who are passionate about building a better world or living in a world that still has billions of people instead of like a couple thousand? Cockroaches.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I'm going to advise people to do something that I'm guilty of not doing, and that is contacting your representatives. Everyone I talk to hears or tells me that that's actually one of the most effective things you can do. The representatives listen when you contact them. So I would recommend doing that. I need to get better about it.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. The people from something Colorado called me. Yeah. So they called me and they asked me to call my representative. And I was like, sure. I cold call for my business. So whenever someone cold calls me, I'm like, hey man, what's going on? Like, how you doing? And they're like, whoa, like, why is someone like happy to hear from me? And I did what she said. She asked me to ask a senator to do something about some bill. And then the representative called me back like a week later. It's like, hey, Ethan, just want you to know, like, we did it. Like, we did the thing that you asked. So like, call us back anytime. We'd love to hear from you. So you're bang on. I think that's great advice for people who are looking to achieve impact. And I really appreciated your time today on the podcast, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I hope that you can get denuclearize the world for us. I'd give you big props for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Fingers crossed.
Cool. I'm rooting for you. So thank you for your work, and thank you for your time. And everybody, we'll see you next week. Have a great one. Take care. So if you or anyone else you know is looking to buy or sell a home anywhere in the USA and would like to create thousands of dollars in donations without any cost out of pocket, please visit ccrealty.org today.